Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cinda Academy's Voice of the SME. My name is Paul Wood, and I'll be conducting an interview today with Lorna Gagnon from Berkshire Hathaway Realty in New Hampshire. In fact, all over the East Coast of the United States, the Northeast Coast, a beautiful part of the country. They do about $1.5 billion in sales every year, so it's not a small one, and she's one of the regional managers at Berkshire Hathaway. We're going to start today because we want one other thing Lorna does, which I think is very interesting to all of our listeners, is that she also runs a consulting business where she has about 25 clients. I'll let her introduce that a little bit more, but around the real estate with Tom Ferry International, and she consults with about 20 clients and actually recommends a lot of marketing strategies to be more successful. So, but Lorna, if you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Berkshire Hathaway, and then we'll jump into it, as well as your consulting business.
Well, thank you for having me today, Paul. As Paul mentioned, I work for Berkshire Hathaway Realty, and we have about 600 agents across New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. We've been a part of the Berkshire master franchise for a long time, so we're excited to be in the real estate space. I also work for Tom Ferry as a consultant and real estate coach for brokers, owners, top agents across the United States. I even have a client as far away as New Zealand.
Well, as long as he pays your airfare, you're fine then, right? So that's terrific. So let's just start. I mean, the goal of this discussion is to get a sort of idea of what marketing strategies were being done before the pandemic, what we're doing differently maybe during the pandemic, and what you see coming out afterwards. And real estate, although people will say, oh, real estate, it's probably immune to this, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on whether the downturn, have you felt it in sales already?
We did see some decrease in sales in the month of April. However, up until March, we were on track for last year, exactly on track. But interestingly enough, in the last 7 days in New Hampshire, we've closed more than 500 sales, accepted more than 500 offers, and put more than 500 properties on the market. So the energy is still there, and there's a high demand for properties.
Well, that's great. So could you just sort of elaborate on what sort of the marketing strategies were? I mean, it might be very different from Europe, but I'm very curious to see what's effective in the US that we could perhaps learn
We've
from.
gone completely digital with our marketing strategies. So we have digital open houses, digital previews of the properties. We use software such as Matterhorn to virtually show properties as well. We've also got a whole plan to encourage people to do drive-by. So get to know the neighborhood right from the comfort of your own home with using things like Google Maps, explore the neighborhood, explore the surrounding properties. And if they would like to set up a live showing, we take all the precautionary measures. So New Hampshire real estate is considered essential. So we're allowed to interact and meet with the consumer, but we have adapted our closing process to be drive-through closings.
Really?
So what's really interesting is the notary meets them in the parking lot, goes from the seller's car, does all the documentation to the buyer's car, changes gloves in between. So that's probably one of the more interesting things that have come out of this.
Oh, that's fascinating. Now, most real estate agents, do they all come out of the Berkshire Hathaway? So obviously Berkshire Hathaway puts a lot of investment into their website and putting their listings on. Is there a lot of individual branding that goes on by agents? Because they're independent, most of them, right? They're not employed by Berkshire Hathaway, they're contractors. So in that case, do they have their own websites and their own, so they list it on Berkshire Hathaway, but they also list it in their own areas?
Yeah, so it depends on the agent. So some agents choose to just use the prepackaged Berkshire Hathaway website and do their marketing through what we call an IDX feed. So in other words, all properties in New Hampshire would show up on their website, regardless if they were the agent involved or not. And some agents choose to go more custom and create custom websites and engage with clients that way.
And
Our industry has been very virtual for a long time, right? Because we've been conducting video tours and things like that. We've already adapted from a electronic signature perspective. The only thing that can't be done electronically, like right now, is the closing documents, which is why we need the mobile notary.
notary on a scooter or something,
Yeah.
right? So, but in those cases where you're trying to get the message out, what is the most common way for, is it based on SEO, or is it based on SEA and Facebook, or social media versus search?
So we used to truly believe in SEO, right? Search engine optimization, and really being at the top of any page. We've shifted it more to seek optimization because we really want to be constantly marketing to the consumer, kind of
Hmm.
before they're ever thinking about buying or selling real estate. So we want to pick them up very early on in the process and have them seek us out. And how we're doing that is creating a lot of content. So our content goes across social channels. Our content is mostly video based. So we've taken a very always be creating content approach and to share your knowledge. So used to be somebody get in the back of my car and I'd tell them everything about a community. Now we're encouraging our agents to share that local, hyper local knowledge, but just do it via video and create libraries of content on a variety of topics.
And how is that distributed? That's got to be distributed primarily through social media,
Yeah.
I would assume, as opposed to any sort of search marketing per se.
Correct. So social media, linking back their YouTube channels, blogging or vlogging.
Hmm.
So kind of having a multi-level marketing approach seems to be working the best to get consumers, to get the eyeballs or attention of consumers.
It's a branding exercise as much of anything, because
Absolutely.
if I remember finding my real estate agent, that I got rid of the first one, no offense to real estate agents, we just weren't a fit, and found a
That's
second one when I
okay.
was buying my house in the States. It's very much a person business and a word of mouth type of business. Now, this was a few years ago before a lot of the social media became sort of de facto. I know I look young, but I'm not that young. Um, but that'll get edited out, don't worry. But in that case, it was much more of a word of mouth. Who recommends who?
Sure.
Now, is the reputation basis, is that, in terms of the video content you're talking about, how much is the reputation management of agents uh, impacting what they do and how they manage their Google reviews, or their Facebook, reviews or comments or things like that? Has that taken off in the last few years?
Oh, exponentially, right? So we've got to meet the consumer where they're at, and we know they're going to go online, they're going to social stalk you, they're going to read your reviews, read your recommendations, read all the testimonials and things like
Hmm.
that. So we very much are in the reputation management business. I think there's been quite a shift from the real estate perspective because it used to be on the social channels, agents would share all kinds of stuff. And now I think they're starting to see that, there's a direct correlation and they've got to be professional 24/7. It can't just be when they're in
Yeah.
front of a client.
So they have to have a shadow account versus their professional account in some ways. And then I know people who do that, and they're very limited on who they let into that channel, for the very reason that they're such a public person.
Absolutely.
And it's, if you're going to get in my car to go drive around, at least in the good old days, I want to know who you are before I get in that car. But it's interesting that the virtual aspects. Have you noticed anything since, besides the mobile notary, that more people are spending at home and one channel is being used more? Are you seeing this content you're developing being accessed more readily or more available?
I would definitely say YouTube has YouTube usage has increased quite a bit. So people are going to YouTube They start on your channel, and before you know it, they're down the rabbit hole, watching 4, 5, 10, 12, 14 videos. I've also seen a real consumer interest in listening to podcasts as well. So
Really?
I have some of my clients that are putting out content on a weekly basis via podcast, and they're really finding that they're building an audience that way as well. So they have their social media channels. They also are looking at audio channels to communicate with consumers. And I would say,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Are these podcasts about, how to buy, what to look for? Is it sort of general insider real estate knowledge, or you know what I mean? Just sort of like tips and tricks on how to buy a house, or is it more than that?
Yeah, it could be everything from 5 tips, when purchasing your first home. It could be an interview with a lender, a mortgage company, title company. What is a home inspection? What's included in a home inspection? Could also be people that they interview in the local community, the principal of the school. Tell me a little bit about your school.
Oh, yeah, that's
So
a great idea.
it's really grassroots, getting out in the community, becoming the voice of the community. And the agents who do it the best are those ones who are interviewing the new businesses and putting it up on their channels, so they pick up not only their influence and their center of influence, but also the businesses.
Well, it's interesting because when you said that, I was thinking, my gosh, I would love to have heard from a kitchen remodeler or a plumber or an electrician, because when you're buying a house, something's always going wrong, a roofer or something like that. So that would be great people to have on a podcast if I could listen to them before I got into the money pit, as they call it. Which is why I'm now in Europe, I think. So I couldn't find my house correctly, but it's an interesting. So in your experience that you're seeing with the minutes coming up on YouTube, if I was a brand new agent and I'm getting ready to start, and let's say the markets are opening up again, the country's opening up from lockdown, what channels would you recommend I use starting out if I don't have an existing audience per se? And how would you recommend I got started at getting my brand, my realtor brand, excluding the work that Berkshire Hathaway would obviously do, assuming you would hire me, of course.
Well, I think you mentioned something earlier on that a lot of folks buy and sell real estate based on a recommendation of another party. So, reaching out to your friends and family is always going to be the first and foremost thing that any new agent should do. And then it's really about getting out into the communities. There's a lot that you can do to create content around the variety of communities. Hey, as I'm driving through this community today, here's the 3 things I love about the community of Portsmouth. It's a great foodie destination, and you can talk about those things. So what we're also seeing is you can leverage other people, right?
Yeah.
So for example, if I know the guys down at Row 34, and I'm going to go in and interview them, talk about their restaurant, anybody who's following their channel is going to see my brand impression just by that. We have agents that actually have channels such as Eats in the 603. So they have full channels that are dedicated to going out and just eating, but at the beginning of every video and the end of every video, they say, hey, by the way, I'm with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services.
So it's using the network effect maximally. So finding out those local communities, leveraging their contacts in their circle. So it's 6 degrees of separation. Your person may be 6 degrees away, but I'm going to get there via here. So and in your opinion, do you think that people are going more to Instagram now? A younger buyer going more to Instagram than say Facebook? The rumor is, Facebook's for my parents' generation, and my daughter, and I can say this, my 22-year-old daughter she's barely on Facebook ever. So
right. So it's kind of it's a little bit of meet the consumer where they're at. So a good agent will have channels across all the social forums. One of the things that my clients are seeing a great uptick in energy on is the new way to be able to interview somebody on Instagram, where if they're an influencer, it'll overlap with your whole audience. And one of my clients, her audience went up exponentially right after she finished a live Instagram event with somebody that she was interviewing. So in other words, they were on that channel and then checked her out because of it.
That's really interesting. So I think that depending on it, so I mean, your recommendation is if you're in a personal business where it's a personal brand or a personal selling, then it's get out and influence. Do you think, because our members at Cinda are primarily resellers and anything like that, you think we should be also in understanding more about the influencer market than just the traditional Facebook? You think that's an effective channel then?
What we see is, it's networking 101. So the more people that you connect with, the more you build your brand, the more you build your audience. Yeah. And the more people who know about you, that's always been a success formula since, the beginning of time. So it's a good opportunity for agents to really increase their center of influence. The other thing that's interesting in real estate is there are some new technologies with AI. So what we're seeing is AI and bots are having full conversations with people, and the people don't realize that they're talking to AI, and the AI is actually able to move them forward to the point where then it's teed off to the agent. So that's some new fascinating development in our industry.
And that's just going to accelerate, I would think,
no question,
as we go forward. Yes, that's a really good point. I hadn't even thought about that. It's, half the time people can't tell if you're interacting with an AI anyway.
Correct.
Unless they tell you.
Yeah.
The days of
and the AI doesn't have the same fears that people have, right? So they'll reach out 4, 5, 6, 10, 12 times, where typically in sales you ask once or twice and people get demoralized by that, and then they back off. Well, the AI doesn't. I watched a whole conversation with an AI last week, and it was, are you ignoring me? And then eventually the person actually did result. She actually came back and said, oh no, I'm sorry. And then come to find out she was looking for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath property. And it was more just because of the persistence of the AI.
Now, how many of your agents, and this sort of leads to a question, how many of your agents feel comfortable with AI? In the sense that if they weren't part of Berkshire Hathaway, how many of them would feel comfortable deploying something?
The industry average age is probably about 55. So when we're talking comfort level of agents, they don't all necessarily embrace change. Of course, we have the early adopters that do, and then we have the late adopters, and it's not always age related. In other words, I have some really progressive, more mature adults that adopt everything. They're just like, they love it. And then I have folks that, they're kicking and screaming to get on a Zoom call with me.
Yes. Actually, everyone's kicking and screaming not to get on Zoom call these days, just because there's so many going on. So I can fully relate to them sometimes, not from a phobia point of view, but but it is interesting that technology is going to accelerate in your industry. Do you think it'll ever get to the point where an agent is only brought in like at the last minute, where with all the virtual tours, with all of the technology, the e-signatures, all the things that could be done, do you think that there's a risk that agents will be marginalized on this?
I truly don't believe so, because the real estate transaction is highly complex. And there are parts of it that could be streamlined with technology, no question. However, the intimacies of how to market the home, how to get the most exposure, how to get the maximum dollar in a consumer's pocket, that still takes a highly effective marketing strategy or plan, right? Yeah. And that's something that's going to be challenging to duplicate from a perspective.
Pure technology.
Pure technology.
Yes.
And then there's that local knowledge, right? The ability to match them with the professionals to help them on their journey to home purchase or home selling, such as the home inspector, the title company, the mortgage company. So there's just so many moving parts that it would be really hard for the consumers to just wade through all of that. I mean, when I first started in real estate, our contracts were a page long. Now, in some of the states I work, it's 14 pages.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's a little more complicated than I wanted to deal with at the time, I can tell you that. But it's been great talking to you. It's particularly this idea of micro or hyper local, content building.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of, what's interesting is I think a lot of this information could be repurposed by, say, restaurants, so as the real estate agent as an influencer themselves.
Right.
Is an interesting angle. And if you're building bodies of content, people want to see it, not just for one purpose, but it could easily be repurposed along. So, and your idea of the channel of restaurants, 603 restaurants, then that's pretty clever. Lorna, really appreciate your time. Is there anything you'd like to add about this, or?
No, I hope you found some value in the information that I shared. And if you have any other questions, as you put this together, I'm happy to answer additional questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lorna. I appreciate it very much.
Have a great day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.